287.
If you would, go ahead and open up your Bibles to Micah chapter 4. Micah chapter 4. This is only a difficult chapter if you've already been pre-indoctrinated with a certain concept, and that sounds horrible when I say that. But it struggles for us that have been inundated by different concepts around the kingdom. And the kingdom that I'm referring to is the kingdom that's prophesied very clearly, that universally everyone will say that there was a kingdom that's prophesied about, and it's going to be coming. Now, when did it come? Is it coming? And where is it? That's always been kind of the question. Now, we have these questions, but when you look at the apostles and you look at the first century Christians and you look at the prophets, they seem to know what it's about. So chapter 4, we started into it last week, and I realized that in a way I may have been overcomplicating it, but I feel that it is important. So I will get all the chapter tonight, but 4 is one of these chapters that is very applicable to the Messiah. And the Hebrew scholars, and they call it the Second Temple scholars, in other words, those after the captivity who came back from captivity, from the time they built the temple, the second temple period, to the time Christ came, their understandings and their cultural beliefs and readings and scholarly interpretations was that the Messiah would be coming in 70 weeks from the time that they came out of captivity. That's 490 years. Very clear. And it was very clear. That's why when you hear me say that, like when Jesus was around, that they were very nervous because they were anticipating the Messiah. Why? Because Daniel told them they could count it. They were in 489 years. So they were within the week, and the 10 years is a week in this calendar when I go through, when we break that down, but not tonight. So they had an idea. They were aware that this Messiah was coming. Now, what else was tied with the Messiah? Well, he was anointed one. He was one that was going to rule. That was clear. He was one coming with a kingdom. That was clear, according to the Second Temple period scholars and the apostles as well. They taught this, and that's something that I'm going to really keep bringing through. So as we go through the book, I want us to understand when you look at prophets, and Dr. North had talked about this idea that where you have one message very clear and on top, and it applies to those you're talking to, and that's what's going on. Micah was speaking very specifically to the people who were alive when he preached these sermons. But God has always put a layer down here that was applying to and connected to all of the prophecies that were kind of under here that still pointed to the Messiah. These are the ones that the scholars could look at and go, wow, there's something more here. They're the ones that agreed that there's more than him just talking to them before captivity, but there's a kingdom coming, there's a Messiah coming, and there's forgiveness of sin coming. All of this was coming. And so they knew this. And so whenever you come to this harsh judgment that Micah is bringing on the people, and knowing that it's pretty severe, the way he describes all the sins against God, and then he goes through and talks about how that the people sinning against one another, and he brings in the real harsh judgment that's coming, that you're going to go into captivity, punishment's coming, destruction, fire, all this stuff's going to happen. And then he hammers the leadership, because it laid at their feet. They're the ones who tolerated it. Weak leadership will go into chaos, and that's what happens spiritually. But then, as God has always done in that kind of double layer, he's also shown that there's hope. He's never let go through that. Even though you're going to go through this judgment and it's inflicted on you and it's just, and I need to do this, I'm still fulfilling my promise. My promise was to Eve, it was to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and it's still to you, Israel. And so he's always showing, yes, I'm whooping on you, I'm punishing you, but guess what? I'm still faithful. I'm still coming through with my promise. He had promised David that there would always be one that would reign. There was coming. They knew this. They were looking forward to that kingship like David. Now, they wanted a physical one. We understand that the people that were walking with Jesus kept thinking, oh, he's going to go to Jerusalem and we'll overthrow. That's what Judas tried to do. Judas tried to kind of like open the can of worms and get Jesus in front of Pilate and the leaders and cause this conflict where he'd be able to slap him down, and then he'd take over and sit in the rule there from Jerusalem. They thought that he was going to do it right then and there. But he wasn't talking about that. We could go through the Gospels and see where even himself, that's not the type of kingdom he was bringing. So the coming kingdom in 4 is very important for us to look at in this idea. We talk about mountains when it comes to prophetic language or vocabulary, when God's talking and he just doesn't randomly just say something about a mountain when he's using it. It's something about government, something about power that he's talking about. So when we say about the mountain of the Lord, it's the ruling location or kingdom, the government of the Lord. And so when you hear that phrase from now on, I hope maybe that'll trigger you to go, oh, that's the rule. That's the kingdom, the mountain. You look at the different places. We kind of went over that. So when did he say, without digging too deep in all these passages because we did last time, he said it will come in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established at the highest of the mountains, and it shall be lifted up above the hills, and all the peoples will come to it. So what did I just say? What is a mountain? A mountain is central type of power government. So in the latter days, the house of the Lord, the government, this new kingdom will be established at the highest of mountains. Now that meant, in other words, there would be nothing higher or greater than him. Now this is where if you start looking literally, you go, well, wait a minute. Now Mount Moriah, where the temple's built, that really wasn't the highest mountain. So if you try to take it literal and you look at a topographical map and you go, well, wait a minute, Mount Olives next to it is a little bit higher. So you can see, what's he going to do? Build it up? No, so we're not talking literal again, but he's showing this is kind of a cue to you to go, this is not a physical mountain he's talking about. This is something he's going to elevate the government that's going to be above him, and it's going to be larger. This ties directly back to Daniel chapter 2. And this is the way that this dream was interpreted. And there's 99.9% of the scholars out there will agree. Now, they won't agree necessarily with the last part at the bottom here, but they all agree that it has to do with kingdoms that are going to be coming after the dream that Daniel has, and he interprets it to Nebuchadnezzar. Now, remember, that's about 70 years before they come out of captivity when Daniel has this dream. And in that dream, he basically is saying there are 4 kingdoms coming, physical earthly kingdoms. And he tells Nebuchadnezzar exactly what they are. He says, the first kingdom is you. You're the first kingdom. Boom, there's a map. Now we can map it out. And if you look historically, we can see where Babylon came, and then they were overthrown by the Persians, and then Alexander the Great comes in, and he overthrows the Persians, and then what happened to the Greeks? The Greeks were then overthrown by Rome. Boom, 4. Now, going back and understanding that you know how many years was going to lapse from the time they come out of captivity to when this king was coming, now we have something else. We have historical things that are happening and when nations are coming up and falling. So now we have a year and we have a kingdom, Rome, the empire of Rome. And then in that dream, something crazy happens. There's this one that's cut from a stone with no hand, a rock. And that rock is hurled against the statue. And it hits the bottom section, which is Rome. The section of the statue was Rome. And it says it's going to pulverize, and it includes the words all nations. So any nation that was going to try to come up against this church, this kingdom, would be destroyed. So that is where even the prophet, even the scribes and them said, this is this new kingdom. This is the new kingdom that's coming, and we want it. Again, they wanted a physical kingdom. That's what they thought was going to happen. They didn't see what was going to come. They never saw the fact that it had to be a crucified Messiah that was going to reign. Remember what Jesus told Pilate. What did he say when he's standing in front of him? Pilate asked him, are you a king? And he says, you have said correctly. However, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were so, my angel would be attacking. So what does that mean? So if he is a Messiah and he is a king and it's not of this world, it matches what Daniel said when he said, it's a hand cut out of, you can't see it. It's something that's spiritual, that was going to come. Jesus says, I'm a king of that spiritual. So we can link all those together again and nail it down and see specifically. And there's a lot of other prophets we could go out and look at. We'll look at just a few. So this is the future church or kingdom. And then also we see that it was one that was going to be rejected, the cornerstone, the stone. So the very stone that Daniel said was going to fly down, smash the other one, and he said that kingdom would never go away. He said this is the one that's going to come, would be one that would never go away. Its government would continue to grow. It would always be in existence. It would not be passed down from peoples to peoples. And that's a physical genealogy of type of way that David's son and David's son's son and kept passing on, and rulers, how monarchs would pass on. No, it's not going to be that way. This is going to be very unique. And so with these kind of attributes, now on that chart, I don't know if you can see them, but we can go and we could look at, we already talked about Daniel 2:44, Isaiah 2:1-4, Joel 2:28. Peter specifically quotes that. He quotes that. So now we have to say, so coming back to our text says, in these days. So that's a time period. So that's where he says. So now we go over to the Gospels and we see where it says, in Mark 1:15, saying that the time is fulfilled and the kingdom of God is at hand. And again, the Greek word means it's within grasp. Now we're 2,000 years past that time. Is something 2,000 years grabbable? Could they grasp that, in other words? No. I mean, you'd have to go if you went 2,000 years before this, even that, you're talking about all the way back to Egypt, whenever the people were back in Egypt. So if they're teaching this in the gospel, and then even Jesus himself in Matthew 4:17, he said, from that time, Jesus began to preach, saying, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Again, showing that all that the prophets had said, everybody's talking about what we're looking at in Micah chapter 4 is these days. That's what they are. They're at hand. Jesus, when he sent out his disciples to go and teach, he told them, go out and heal, cast out demons, do all these things. He sent out 70 to do this. And he said, and proclaim as you go, saying, what? The kingdom of heaven is at hand. When they accused him of casting out demons by the devil himself, Belshazzar, what does Jesus say? He said, but if it's by the Spirit of God that I cast out demons, what's happening? The kingdom of God has come upon you. So it just over and over, we can kind of see this. And then when we go over here to Acts chapter 2, 16 and 17, this is exactly what he's quoting. And he even tells us, this is what's really cool. You don't have to have some sort of Bible concordance to go, boy, that sounds familiar. Let me search for those. No. Peter tells us it's the prophet Joel. And what does he say? In the last days it shall be. And he goes through and says, I'll pour my spirit out on all flesh. Your sons and daughters shall prophesy. And it goes on. And I thought about going over to Joel and looking at that, because if you read Joel chapter 2 and chapter 3, you will see very clearly that Joel is talking about a period when the Messiah would come, and that when he came, he would establish his kingdom and he would pour forth his Spirit. Peter is quoting it. So when are these days, you see, that Micah is talking about? It's the days that when Christ came and established this kingdom and came forward, those was the time. So why does it get crazy? Well, it does because people like Schofield and other scholars within the past 150 years, which is very recent history, there's a few in the past that came up with this idea of a millennial peace rule, and then it depends on how you look at it. There are so many different flavors to this type of rapturing and things. It has just really confused everybody. And so now the kingdom didn't come, but it did come, and so it's kind of invisible right now, but it's coming, and it's going to land in Jerusalem overseas there, and he's going to rule from that city over there. That's not what these prophets are saying. That's not even what Jesus said. He is ruling now. That's the thing that we have to look at. And then verse 2, he talks about how these nations will come and say, let us come up to the mountain of the Lord. That was coming. That was kind of acts. If you look at the day of Pentecost, what was going on day of Pentecost? You had nations represented from all over the world, the modern world, from all these different races of people that were Jewish, but they were from all around. And what did they come? They came to Mount Zion. They came to Jerusalem. And then Peter stood up and he echoed out the announcement of this kingdom. And then what happened? They took it and they went where? They flowed away from the mountain. They took that message out as they became Christians. And then the disbursement that we read in Acts where they were scattered. And then it flowed away from this mountain. And then the gospel went forward and it just continued to grow. And Rome tried to destroy it. All nations, many nations have tried to destroy it. Can't do it. And that fits into some of the language that we're going to hear. It's not a physical nation. The nation itself, this kingdom itself was going to function completely differently from a worldly kingdom. And that's why he says, and he shall judge between many peoples, and they shall decide disputes for strong nations far away, worldwide. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Now, if you're very physical, very, very literal, this would fit into this idea that there was a physical kingdom. But now go back to Israel when they were a literal nation, when they literally had real estate. They had, let's just go back to King David's period. He had an army, they had weapons of war, and they had warfare. They were fighting the Philistines, and they were getting invasions. There was all this warfare going on. Not this nation that's coming, no longer. So he's saying there would be no need for warfare. There'll be no need for swords and everything. Everything is going to be peaceful because it's not a nation. This kingdom that's coming is not one that's going to go out and invade another country. It's not going to have warfare against it. Other nations can't warfare against it. Where is it? I mean, declare war on kingdom of Christ. Well, where do we land the forces at? Who do we shoot? Everyone, because it's everywhere. You also have to remember that the saints and the martyrs were also a part of this spiritual kingdom, and they still are until the Lord turns this kingdom back over to his Father. There's a kingdom that is it's not comprehensible in the physical world. So when he describes these things, it is this idea that there's no nation that's going to come up against it because it's not a physical nation. If it was, then you could bring war upon it. And then he comes back again to this illusion or this idea about how the Lord's going to rescue Zion. Remember what I said, okay? There's a direct application to those who are listening to it, but there's another deeper meaning in it. So let's go ahead and read 6 and 8. And in that day, what day? Well, he just talked about it. He said in those days. So he's very specific in that. Now, if I was somebody who was sitting there listening to Micah tell me, I would think about, well, we're going to go off to captivity, and it would fit, and we're going to be isolated away from our land, and then we're going to come back to our land, and this would work for them. But it also is very applicable to this idea of the spiritual kingdom. And so now look at the people that are going to be a part of this. I will assemble the lame and gather those who have been driven away by those in whom I have afflicted. And the lame I will make a remnant, and those who are cast off, a strong nation. This is that strong kingdom he's going to make out of them. And the Lord will reign over them in Mount Zion from this time forward and forevermore. And you, O tower of the flock, hill of the daughter of Zion, to you it shall come. The former dominion shall come, kingship for the daughters of Jerusalem. If you're not a Hebrew scholar, that whole thing can get lost, and that's our problem. And I'm not going to dive off into all the Hebrewic type of ways and the language in which he's saying, but again, keep in mind as well, there is an application to those who are going to come back and be gathered, those who had been scattered. There's also the application of the spiritual side where his people had been scattered all over, and that it would be united back into this kingdom that the Messiah was going to bring in. And it is always a remnant. The lame and the afflicted, sound familiar? Those are the very ones who Jesus came. You know, if you look at those who are downtrodden, the ones that were brought in, and he's going to take, there's kind of this picture as well, where he's saying, I'm going to take the very weak and make them strong. I'm going to take something that the world thinks is silly or weak, and they're actually going to be the strength of it. And a lot of this fits with the Beatitudes. Blessed are who? The poor in heart, the weak, the meek, the very ones that have the right heart are the ones. So it's a beautiful, very complex kind of picture that he's kind of drawing here. And now he turns and he starts to talk about the weeping and the direct message more directly to what they're going to experience. He says, now why do you cry aloud? Is there no king in you? Has your counselor perished? That pain seized you like a woman in labor? Writhe and groan, O daughter of Zion, like a woman in labor. For now you shall go out from the city and dwell in the open country. You shall go to Babylon. There you shall be rescued. There the Lord will redeem you from the hand of your enemies. Remember again, there's a direct level and there's one that's less, that's underneath, that's prophetic towards. But this is more right directly towards those who are listening. They're going to suffer the consequences of being carried off into captivity. But this idea is interesting because why are you crying? You know, it's kind of like when you got caught and you get punished and then you're crying. It's kind of a silly question. Why are you crying? Well, I just got whooped, you know, I'm suffering. And it's kind of a rhetorical question he's posing at them because he's reminding them of the condition that they're going to be in. Because what has happened? King Jehoiakim was taken away by Nebuchadnezzar, and their king was taken away and basically left the city very vulnerable. They had no royalty. Remember back whenever Samuel was approached by the people and said, we want a king, we want to be just like everybody else. And the whole period from the time that Joshua came in and settled the land and gave the allotments out, they did not have a king. Who was their king? See, I'm wrong. They had a king. God was their king. But what did they do? We want a king. We want a king. We want one just like everybody else. And so God told Samuel, let's give them a king. Let's give them a king. Let's give them what they want. And how'd that end up? Not good. They've always wanted a king. They only had maybe one or two, maybe three, Hezekiah, Joe, you know, there's a few kings that were good, but almost all the kings were bad. So it's kind of interesting. It's almost like God said, where's your king? Somebody, if they were very spiritual, would say, you're our king. But see, they're looking around going, yeah, they took him off in captivity. They don't get it again. They're lost. They don't get the idea that God is their king, and they can't function without this worldly king. They feel lost. Instead of turning to him again, saying, wait a minute, we don't need Jehoiakim. We have him. He's our king. Has your counselor perished? Where's your wisdom? And he's already blasted them in the previous chapter by saying, they're fools. They were leading you astray. If you paid them right, they would tell you what you wanted to hear. They were so corrupt. So where's your counselors? You see, your counselors were telling you peace, peace, like what Isaiah said. Oh, it's all good. Don't worry about it. God will never do this to you. You're his chosen children. You're going to be fine. It's just a little rough step. No. And so that's why he's like asking him, like, oh, by the way, where are your counselors now? How good was that advice, huh? Where are they? And that that type of, whenever a woman goes into labor and it hits, it's painful and it comes in waves and will not relent. And you can't stop it unless you got medicine today that they can kind of stop labor. But that's that type of period of time that when Nebuchadnezzar is coming in and he's surrounding, it's going to be like a woman going into labor pain, and it's going to start and it's going to hit and it's going to come and it's going to go and it's going to come and it's going to go, and it's not going to let up, and it's going to be like it's never going to stop. Now, I'm not a woman and never had a baby, but what I have witnessed is that most of the time, if you were to ask them in that moment, if they didn't try to hurt you, they would tell you, this is not going to stop. Right? It's like, this is still happening. And then it would ease up and you go, oh, okay, that one's over. And then it'd hit them again and you'd see a wave of contractions again. And it's like, oh, here it goes again. It goes again. And it could go for hours. Suzanne's went forever. I mean, it's like, that's what this is going to be like, he's saying. When Babylon comes and you're going to look around and go, where's your advisor? Where's your king? Oh, that's right. He's already gone, isn't he? He isn't helping you much, is he? So weep, groan, writhe, like a woman that's in labor pain. But you're going to go out of the city. You're not staying. Now, this is very important for us to understand what that city looked like. The city of Jerusalem was one of the most amazing fortresses when it came. If an army ever wanted to try to invade and take the city of Jerusalem the way that it was built, especially by this time with Hezekiah extending the walls and the slopes and trying to go up to it, it was almost unfathomable to think that you could conquer this city of Jerusalem. If you'll recall, going all the way back to David, when David tried to take Jebus, which is Jerusalem, they couldn't do it. They tried to conquer it. It was given as an inheritance. Nobody could take it. And when David became king and he's uniting them, he said, hey, can somebody go in this? And they found a crevice. They came through the wells and crawled through these tunnels to get up there, and they opened it up and they breached it, and David was able to overcome and subdue and take the city. This city. So when he says here that you're going to go out of the city, it's almost like, what? Jerusalem? There's no way. There's no way. Babylon did. That's why when you consider the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans and what efforts it took them over 5 months, 3 legions of pounding that city and trying to take it. They felt very secure. And he's saying, you're going to lose your city. You're going to walk out into open country. That's exposure, see? They could hide in that city and get pounded, and say, oh, we're going to hold, kind of like a hurricane hitting. We can hold on. We can endure it. No, you're going to be put out. You're going to go out. You're going to go to Babylon. Now, remember, this is about 60 years away. And so it's still quite a ways away. And a lot of people think, there's Micah, blah, 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 his bad news preaching, fire and brimstone preaching, but it came true. But it's from there he's going to rescue you. He's going to rescue you. And then 4:11 and 12. And now many nations assembled against you, saying, let her be defiled. This is the armies and those that came and ready to bring judgment upon her are sitting there saying this taunt, let her be defiled and let our eyes gaze upon Zion. Ooh, that's God's house. Remember when I said Zion? They're going to come in and they're saying, let's go defile God's mountain. And they did. They razed and they burned the temple and destroyed it. But look what this is great. This is great. But they do not know the thoughts of the Lord. They don't understand his plan that he has gathered them as sheaves for the threshing floor. The joke's on them. They think they can come. Yes, they're carrying out what God wants, but they are also in judgment. So if you're sitting there going, we're going to be destroyed, we're going to be let off, he's going to bring us out of captivity, saying, yeah, but listen up. They're not getting away with this either. They're not getting away with this. And they didn't. Babylon fell and fell hard whenever they come down. And so they're going to be described as this sheaves with his nothing. left on the threshing floor, which is just blown away and then burned, away. And so he's encouraging them by saying, arise and thresh. So there's going to be this call that's going to come back, and he describes this regeneration of them and rejuvenation of them. For I will make your horn iron, and I will make your hooves bronze, and you shall beat in pieces many peoples, and shall devote their grain to the Lord, and their wealth to the Lord of the whole earth. Remember this? This is also not only directly talking about their success in coming back. One of the decrees that Cyrus said when he came back, when he told them to go back and to build the temple, he says very clearly, blows my mind. Cyrus the Persian says, your Lord your God have told me to send you back and build the house of God. And he gives them all the treasures that Nebuchadnezzar had took and put in his house of his false gods and gave them to them and gave them money. And we see that, again, they were given the resources and everything from these other nations to come in and to build it up. And then the enemies that was opposed during Ezra, when he came back, and Nehemiah, when they tried to rebuild the walls, the pressure that they had from the nations around them, they were like not wanting them to rebuild. That threat was destroyed, removed. They were not able to endure the way that they were able to uphold. So that's chapter 4, speed level. It's very deep, it's very rich. But the key thing I want you to understand, when you hear this prophetic language, especially because you have heard this, it's in it. There's so many references. Again, this is the messianic kingdom that he is also saying is coming, along with the direct application of what's going to happen to them. But very powerfully, it links with Isaiah, and Isaiah and Micah say the exact same words, and they're prophesying at the same time. They're also pointing to this messianic kingdom. Peter, again, stood up and said, these are those days that are pointing to it. What you're seeing is exactly what was told. God said would fulfill the promise of bringing this kingdom in and bringing it in with the Messiah, the anointed one that you've been looking for. Okay, we'll get into chapter 5 next week, and I hope you'll read ahead, go back and take a look at it. You'll probably, if you read 4 again, and even 1, 2, 3, and 4, hopefully you'll be able to start to pull it together and look at it. And so if there's somebody here this evening, we always like to stop for a moment and talk about how we're doing with the Lord, how we're living with him and before him. And if there's something that can be done to assist you while we're here and you're comfortable, we're going to be singing the invitation song. And if you'd like to let it be known, if you need the prayers of the church or you need to become a child of God, we hope that you take this moment while we stand and sing.